Berserk is one of the most detailed mangas in the business. Miura puts care and detail into each page of his work, often communicating story beats and character moments visually to the reader, rather than verbally. Guts' character design changes throughout the course of the series, and each change, be it physical to his body or his armor change, helps tell a story purely on a visual front, and that is what I'd like to discuss in today's video. Scars telling a story is a common trope in media. It's easy to identify a battle-hardened warrior in fiction with the scars their body bear, as this is an easy visual indicator to the reader of the hardships that such a character has gone through without verbally telling us that this is the case. In Guts' case, however, Miura often makes a good middle ground. Almost all of Guts' striking character design is explained throughout the series. His iconic nose scar, for example, was the result of Gambino angrily striking his face after Guts got the upper hand in their mock battle at the mercenary camp. This scar may seem just like a minor detail, but to Guts and the reader, it represents that of conflicting emotions. After Gambino angrily struck Guts, causing the scar, he also gave him the salve to help heal the wound, which marks as a key moment in their rocky relationship. Gambino is abusive and spiteful against Guts, yet here, he shows a tiny bit of compassion when causing this injury. The nose scar is a visual indicator to Guts and the reader, which represents the start of his rapport between the two, and the nose scar, it's such a key character feature to Guts that it will always elicit those thoughts. The same philosophy can also be applied to Guts' wardrobe throughout the series. Our first look of Guts in the manga is him donning his iconic black swordsman armor, which differs slightly from the same designs of the armor we see later in the Lost Children chapter and in the Conviction arc after it gets the upgrade from Godo and Rickert. As Guts is fighting increasingly more difficult apostles, his fight with the Count could have even been a deciding factor in this. He has padded out his armor significantly, adding more protection to his lower half, as seen with this panel with Jill. This is also in line with Guts' character too. He constantly adapts to fights and situations on the fly, and Miura successfully demonstrates this in minor, yet detailed character design changes. Guts is the sort of person who would upgrade his armor based on previous fight experience, and giving the reader the opportunity to contrast and compare from previous designs allows them to pick up on details that they previously could have missed. Hell, even I missed the fact he upgraded his armor himself on my first reading of a manga. Before moving on to Guts' character design change from Conviction onwards, I would like to revisit the Golden Age, as Guts has many wardrobe changes over the course of that arc. Guts as a young child in Gambino's mercenary camp wears the standard mercenary wear, not quite standing out himself. He dons a simple helmet with what looks to be leather armor. Honestly, there's not much to say here about this otherwise. I do like how the rest of Gambino's mercenary group wear more traditional iron and steel armor, whilst Guts is wearing the leather, perhaps due to his status of only being a young child at the time. He couldn't handle, metal armor. 4 years later, we see the design that Guts dons as a young 15-year-old mercenary, which is also one of my favourite Guts designs of all time. Eagle-eyed viewers can also recognise this same look from the Black Swordsman arc in the Guardians of Desire chapter, with a flashback conversation between Guts and Griffith. The scarf is a nice detail too. It's typically coloured in a light blue on cover arts and illustrations. The softer colour palette is a good visual indicator of a more innocent and hopeful Guts in a way, well, tragic backstory aside, and is a harsh contrast to his Black Swordsman design, at which point only revenge clouded his mind, and his colour palette reflected this. Can I just say that I love those little details that Miura bakes in. The reader can establish a timeline of when this conversation took place between Guts and Griffith in the Black Swordsman arc, based on Guts' character design alone. The reader knows that this takes place somewhere between the 3-year time skip in the Golden Age, after Guts helps Griffith destroy the enemy camp. Even Guts' weapon arsenal changes quite a lot throughout the series. Although his iconic Dragon Slayer is a mainstay chronologically after the Golden Age, Guts has had quite a few swords during the Golden Age, even with his preference of large swords being tied into his backstory. Tying character design to tangible reason, the only reason Guts used large swords in the first place is because there was only adult swords at the camp. Gambino wouldn't let him use anything his size, so Guts got used to large swords, and he learned to work with that, and Miura made sure to bake this in throughout the series. Guts primarily uses greatswords in the Golden Age due to his preference for large swords, and these often switch off screen in subtle ways, but noticeable if the reader pays attention. In the 3 years time skip in the Golden Age, 18-year-old Guts' sword is slightly different. The hilt has a lot more thickness to it, and there's a lot more detail towards the lower half of the sword. I always loved details like this, as it shows that Berserk feels like a living, breathing world even when the reader isn't experiencing it. Many stories have the characters using the same weapons and fulfilling the same design to match the status quo. Not that I'm saying that this is always a bad thing, but not Berserk. Guts is a mercenary, so it would seem logical that he would be constantly switching swords, either due to his old ones breaking in battle, or just that as he rose the ranks as captain of the raiders, he required better equipment to do the job. Guts is a lot more armoured this time around. Due to him being a part of a mercenary group, he has the means to pad himself out. He dons a cape instead of a scarf this time, whilst keeping the blue motif. He also keeps the helmet, which often serves as a neat visual indicator of interesting battles about to occur at any given moment, such as the Battle of Doldry. Guts will often pull the helmet down when shit is gonna go down, so to speak. Miura replaces this with facial expressions in later arcs. Black Swordsman Guts, for example, is always making a lot of creepy facial expressions, such as this one in Conviction, when shit is about to go down. But I always liked that there was a design element in Golden Age, which helped incorporate this too. One insanely interesting detail is notice that only Guts' left arm is armoured. This becomes more obvious in another of his later Golden Age designs. It can be one of two things. Miura could either be alluding to this arm being lost to Borkov in the Eclipse, or that Miura is so used to Guts having his mechanical arm, it felt weird to him not to incorporate this armoured arm motif into a Guts design who still possesses said arm. Either way, it's still super cool. Very quick tangent here, but one other super cool detail is seeing Guts' holster unsheathed next to him when he's about to attack. This is a detail present throughout the series, but I personally only really started noticing it in the Golden Age arc. I always thought it was a neat detail, nothing too deep or analytical here, it just looks nice. Another thing to note that starting of a Nosferatu Zod chapter, this is the first instance we see Guts use the Band of a Hawk emblem to clip his cape. I always wondered why it wasn't used in the first instance we saw him post 3 years in the Hawk's battle to defend the King of Midland. Perhaps it could be interpreted that he only decided to don this after his scolding by Casca to take his role in the Hawks more seriously. Either way, it's a cool visual motif, and shows Guts' loyalty to the band at this point. Guts retains this design and weaponry until the Battle of Doldry. Bosgon breaks Guts' sword he's had for the majority of the Golden Age, yet when Zod tosses the Kushan sword, nice foreshadowing there Miura, to aid Guts, which helps guide Griffith towards the greater goal in return, Guts could quickly adapt and use the weapon, also helps that it was a large sword, which we know Guts has been using all his life. This once again is a cool visual indicator, which draws a parallel to Guts and Zod. Zod, to me, was always meant to serve as what an apostle version of Guts would be like, in terms of combat philosophy and seeking the strong, so it makes sense that Guts' affinity for large weapons would also be reflected in Zod. After Guts goes off to wander from battle to battle for a year after his conflict with Griffith, he gets his final change in the Golden Age, and it's by far my favourite Guts design. He is a lot more kitted out, having additional armour padding on his legs, chest and all over really. His cape is now imbued with a pin much like the early design of Guts in the Golden Age. In fact, I believe it's the same one before the Nosferatu Zod chapter, the Band of a Hawk pin being absent since he separated that part of his life from himself. The armour on his left arm is a lot more prominent, which also alludes to him losing it at the Eclipse. The sword has changed now too, sporting an overall thicker design of the hilt, with a more rounded design overall than before. There is an untold story here, just from looking at Guts' new design, without Miura verbally telling us this. The increased armour shows that he's taking his new quest to seek the strong seriously, and that he's kitted out appropriately for the past year. The added armour also looks to be leather, mainly around the bottom half, so he can still fight as swiftly and quickly as he did previously, whilst also having that extra protection. Overall, just look how triumphant Guts looks here. This is probably the peak of Guts' mental state, and that's reflected in this design. However, as we know past this, Guts' change and his character design helps tell that tragic story. So join me in the next and final part, where I'll be discussing the rest of Guts' design, post-conviction Black Swordsman, and the one and only Berserker armor. I'll see you then, and thanks for watching.